Welcome everyone to 15.7, the final chapter on lipids, where we put it all together and we go into the cell membrane and we learn that lipids, many lipids and carbohydrates and proteins and sugars and all these things can be in the membrane bilayer. The membrane bilayer can communicate and offer a way to signal to the internal part of the cell through cell receptors. We're not going to get too deep into that because this is an introductory course. I don't want to confuse you, but I want to see you understand the entire big picture. Welcome to GOBC Chem 114. Let's get on with it. And cell membranes. What are cell membranes? Well, we learned about phospholipids coming from glycerol, a couple fatty acids, a phosphate, possibly an amino alcohol. But what happens on the membrane? Just in general, what are some things that can happen? Well, we know the cell's got to be able to take in stuff and it's got to be able to give out stuff, right? The cell has to be able to take in materials, it has to be able to get rid of materials, right? Some of the materials it gets rid of might be waste. Of course, some of the materials might be useful. They might be cell signaling molecules. All sorts of things can happen. Almost anything that you can imagine that would make practical sense happens in the cell. So your common sense helps you even in chemistry. And of course, we're on the biological chemistry side, the very ending of this course. And so we start to look at, and we do have chapter 16. Let's not get too excited. We still have another chapter which of great learning. And we can see how things can diffuse and facilitated diffusion and active transport, how we can get molecules in and out of the cell. We see how one takes energy, one happens naturally, doesn't even require a protein, the other two require proteins. So let's take a look at this. We separate cellular contents by using a lipid bilayer. It's two rows of phospholipids to be simple, but it's dotted with all sorts of cool things. It's got proteins in it, it's got cholesterol in it, it's got channels in it. It's got all sorts of things going on, but let's keep it simple. It's primarily made of phospholipids with a polar head that faces the outside or the water part of the environment, and uh, the nonpolar part or the nonpolar tails face the inside of the lipid membrane. And so we look at this fluid mosaic model. They love using this. Artists love to draw this. There's a lot of artwork in science as well as learning and logic and creativity. And so look at this. This is crazy. All sorts of things are going on here. You got carbohydrate chains like amylopectin attached to some kind of protein. You got cholesterol molecules, you got phospholipids, you got strange proteins that seem to be more on the inside of the cell, and then you have proteins that seem to be more on the outside of the cell, and sugar markers on the outside of the cell. Remember things as complicated for, now this isn't a red blood cell here because it's got a big nucleus, but red blood cells have sugar markings that give us blood types that are recognized, that can either cause an allergic reaction, an inflammation reaction, or it's perfectly fine if we get the right blood type. So you as nurses have to be very cognizant of these carbohydrate side chains when it comes to delivering blood to patients. So lipid bilayers, what happens? They have proteins, carbohydrates, cholesterols. Of course, we have phospholipids, which make up the majority of it. We have these unsaturated fatty acids that are attached to these phospholipids. We can have communication where we can have protein receptors that can recognize hormones, and those hormones can bind proteins on the outside of the cell and send messages all the way down to the nucleus. We have neurotransmitters that can bind receptors on neural cells and cause neural responses due to hormones or neurotransmitters. Very cool stuff and very sophisticated, simple and complex all at the same time. Um, these three methods we saw earlier, and we're going to revisit that slide. We saw diffusion and passive transport, which moves particles from high concentration to low concentration, like osmosis, but instead of water moving, particles can also move sometimes. Water can move too, and that's going on constantly. We look at facilitated transport, where a protein channel can increase the rate of diffusion, but it doesn't necessarily need ATP to do it, which is energy. ATP costs currency. It's like, and let's take a look at the third one, active transport, where you move ions against a concentration gradient, which usually takes ATP and costs energy. So we can look at facilitated transport as kind of like going to the free park in the middle of the city. And we can look at active transport like going to an amusement park, which costs lots of money, right? So that's just a cool way to look at it. So these cell membranes, just looking at the way transport paths happen. So you could have ions, or you could even have molecules. These could be ions, like ions such as cations, or which potassium and sodium, or they could be chloride, such as Cl minus, or they could be a molecule like glucose and stuff. So diffusion happens naturally. Small enough molecules can go in and out of the membrane sort of freely. Um, but remember, charges, repelling and not repelling, and all those things can play a role. Facilitated diffusion, an integral protein, it interacts with its molecule of choice, and it causes the protein to change its conformation and shoot whatever it is into the cell that it might need, or it can be oriented the opposite way and send it out of the cell. And we can have active transport where ATP is lysed. We lose ATP and generate ADP. We spend some ATP and we can facilitate diffusion against a gradient. Maybe the cell signals want us to do that for some reason. We don't know what the reason would be. This is just a generic way to look at it. So transport pathways through the cell membrane, very crucial to our survival. So, just a question. A transport of particles across a cell membrane from a high concentration to a low concentration is called what? Facilitated transport? Well, that seems to involve a protein, a little more complicated. Diffusion? That's just concentration gradient dependent. Active transport, that requires ATP and a protein. So the answer is going to be B. It's going to be diffusion because it's only concentration dependent to get through the phospholipid bilayer, or the fluid mosaic model. So correct answer. And finally is this cool slide as we come to an end of chapter 15. Lipids, fatty acids, steroid nucleus. Fatty acids can be triglycerols that form with glycerols are found in fat and oils. When their fats are saturated and often solid, they can be hydrolyzed into alcohols and fatty acids. Oils can be unsaturated with double bonds like alkenes. They too can undergo hydrolysis, but using sodium hydroxide for saponification, and alcohols and salts of fatty acids can generate soaps. We can have prostaglandins, which are very important in our body and for hormones and what have you. Waxes, long chain alcohols, they're fatty acids as well. We can get into something more sophisticated than a glycerol molecule with 3 fatty acids. We can add either a glycerol or sphingosine molecule, a phosphate, and an amino alcohol, and that generates our membranes, which are phospholipids. And remember now, these fatty acids can be used as energy. If energy gets low, our glucose levels get real low for a long, long time, we can start eating up our cell membranes to get energy from fatty acids, which isn't quite as good as from glucose, but it happens. So we have polar and nonpolar parts of phospholipids, with the phosphate or amino alcohol part being polar and the fatty acid alkyl chain being nonpolar. We have lipid bilayers that we just saw in the fluid mosaic model. And then we have the cell membrane that has all these complicated ways to transport things. It has sugar markers. It has, all sorts of things, cholesterol in it. It's quite complicated. It's a living cell. It makes up a living cell. You've got to have a living cell membrane. And then we have the steroid nucleus, going back to what we learned about earlier, which makes up cholesterol and those bile salts and those steroids and hormones and those anabolic steroids that we looked at, and really cool stuff. So that does it for chapter 15. You guys keep studying, keep learning, and we'll be back with chapter 16 real soon.